we're here. Resilience Gone Wild. I'm here with my fantastic producer, Kai Sorensen, who makes this all just awesome.
Hello.
And,
thank you. It's flattering. I really just pushed some buttons and, edit out the occasional cough. But yes, hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a Monday here. And Jessica, you got a lot of traveling coming up. You want to tell our listeners about all that?
Yeah, I am living by a recent comment I heard and put in my newsletter. If anybody wants to sign up for my newsletter, subscribe. I'm doing some cool quotes, and I'm living by the difference between good friends and best friends is that you share memories with good friends and you make memories with best friends. And I am just out there experiencing, adventuring, like really living my life. And I just got back from New Orleans from a really fun wedding. Party, band in the street, second line, like to the whole neighborhood and all that. And I'm headed to Chicago to make memories with my daughter who is moving from Chicago to New York. Oh, wow. And it's literally like 70 degrees colder there than I'm used to. But got the turtleneck on.
At the moment. Yeah.
Right. So that's my my movement. And every time I go anywhere, I stop, I go to nature, I go to an aquarium, I go to a zoo, I interact, I whatever. So always make that part of whatever you're doing.
That's great. What's taking your daughter from Chicago to New York?
Oh, new job, wanting to be in New York with the people that she loves the most. Even, us during the summers, but lots of friends. Sure. And AI, healthcare, all kinds of interesting transitions from consulting. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Yeah. Speaking of trips, I think we committed to going to Mexico City in the spring.
Oh my, she was there. I've got to connect you guys. Thought it was the most fantastic place. I have not been there yet. And I've heard just incredible.
Yeah, we've always wanted to go, and Miles is still 2 and under, so we can fly for free.
Yes.
So we figured we might as well take advantage of that. So, but yeah, before we get into the episode with Ken today, which is all about elephants and this platinum rule, I think it's important that we acknowledge this news that came out on the day we dropped the podcast was about this tourist in Thailand who was killed by an elephant. Can you help us elaborate on that story and what we need to maybe take from that?
Yeah, such an important story. We want to adventure. Like we're just talking about that, right? Like go on adventures, go on, live your life, make memories. But when we do that, we're interacting with new people. We're interacting with new places and new cultures and new nature. And, there's a sense of trust of believing that, if somebody sets up that was my daughter,
sets
you up for some adventure that you pay for, you think, you assume that they know what they're doing and it's going to be safe. Mm-hmm. But let's be real, okay? Like there's always the platinum rule to consider. Like we are setting things up in this world for economic purposes, right? Like this elephant sanctuary thing in Thailand where people bathe elephants and hang out with elephants and cook for them and feed them is all about the people, right? Sounds lovely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But what do elephants? I mean, I was just in Botswana with elephants and got a sense by, the scale and the intelligence and the protection, right? That they are embedded with. And you just never know what even a pet or someone else's pet or your own pet or a wild animal, or a tree that falls, or lightning or any natural phenomenon will do in its natural state. Yeah. And these elephants are living a life that is not comfortable. And that's an understatement, right? Like they are living a life that does not give them the freedom that they are used to having. And at a certain point, I gather this woman was doing what she was supposed to do. She was bathing the elephant, and the elephant felt trapped and scared. And it's a very big creature, and it just like
probably didn't take much.
Swiped or something, right? And it was just unbelievably bad luck. Like the elephant didn't actually try to hurt the person; he tried to move the person, from what I understand. And she hit her head on a rock, and died. So, we keep blaming. When a bear looks for food or an elephant,
you go to blame the animal,
right? And
not
then
the behaviors we contribute to the whether it's global warming and climate change and animals coming into cities, or in this case, what a seemingly wonderful afternoon. Are we thinking about, is this what the elephant wants right now?
Yeah.
You know,
Platinum rule.
Yeah, it's the platinum rule. So, and again, you and Ken are going to get into this conversation, and the majesty of the elephants, the intelligence, but when you have to live with them, they can destroy your economic well-being, your livelihood in a matter of hours.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. The conversation you guys get into about the importance of conservation, not for tourism, but conservation for the people in those communities who need the support, so that they can continue living and supporting and protecting.
Yeah, being the guardians, because someone needs to protect their own lives and the elephants' lives to keep this whole balance going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one more thing. We got to read a social media comment because we promised to do that.
Yes.
This is a good one. I love it. So this came in, and I started listening to the Laughing Goal podcast while getting ready for the day. We also did the follow-up interview with Cy, which is awesome. I immediately realized this is a podcast to keep me company on my long drive this morning to meet a friend for a paddling adventure. I am now following your podcast.
Wow.
I can tell your podcast will be most helpful to keep me grounded.
Wow. Beautiful. I love that. Yeah.
Speaking of grounded, do you have any, let's see, do you get travel anxiety? Like, what kind of things do you reach into your tool bag for to kind of help keep you grounded?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a really interesting question, because I've been traveling a lot with my husband, who really doesn't like to travel. And it's funny because
my wife's the same way.
Right? And my son doesn't like to travel, but my daughter and I do. And it's all about that same approach that you get to choose the story, right? So the story that my daughter Michelle and I just go to automatically is, wow, this is so cool. How awesome is it that I get to get on an airplane or get on or drive or whatever, or walk and find myself somewhere new with a new adventure ahead of me. And the other half of the world goes to, oh my God, I hate traveling. It's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be disruptive. Right, exactly. Catastrophize. And you've got, you went to that place where you recreated the story in your head when you went with Miles.
Oh, yes.
You switched it up.
The toddler having a meltdown at the gate?
Right.
I'm pretty sure I what's the word for bringing it to life when you think it?
Manifested.
I manifested that moment because I've been anxious about it all day.
Right, exactly. And we send that negative energy or positive energy. We have the choice, right?
Yeah.
So to stop and to answer your question that if you stop for a moment and you say, what is the choice that I have right now? I can either feel positive and anticipation and excitement and opportunity and send that energy out to everyone around me, because everyone around me is going to feel my energy, whether it's your almost 2-year-old or it's your wife or everybody else who's on that plane and in the airport or whatever. Or you can just send super positive energy out. It's like, this is awesome. Smile at each other, smile at yourself. Think about what you're going to gain from this. What's net positive, not anxiety ridden and all that. So
I love that. I love that. I'm gonna write that one down. Maybe I'll do some journaling on it. Awesome. Well, should we get to the interview with Ken?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
All right, enjoy, everybody.
Great.
Welcome, Ken Coe. I am so excited to be together for this Resilience Gone Wild chat about elephants, the platinum rule, and so much more. Ken is a passionate nature lover, antelope expert, birder, nature photographer, adventurer, and visitor to Africa. I think we're headed for number 49 on the number of trips we've taken, right, in a few weeks.
Right.
Pretty exciting. Can't wait to hear about many of them. I've seen many photos from many incredible places where he has explored and photographed some incredibly remote places, wildlife, and people. Ken has been deeply involved with the Nature Conservancy for many years, and I'm looking forward to his telling us all about the vital work they've done and continue to do in Africa and beyond. So I first met Ken through my husband, Larry. They play lots of golf together and are also part of an amazing guys book club where they read lots of very long nonfiction books that explore some really deep subjects. I feel so fortunate to have gotten to know Ken and his wife, Carla, and I'm thrilled to give credit to them for getting Larry and my kids excited about going on a safari. Welcome, Ken, and given my intro, tell us more.
Thank you, Jessica. Well, Jessica asked me about a month ago, what can we learn from elephants that may ultimately help us conserve them? And at first I thought, that's a tough question, but it really is, because there is an answer to that. Well, to get there, I'm going to first talk about why we like elephants in the first place. I mean, to be talking about elephant conservation in sitting around in Connecticut, USA, is a little bit bizarre, right? Well, we must love elephants. So yeah, I'm going to talk about that first, and talk about how elephants are just like us in many ways. We'll delve into some interesting things about their lives, and then talk about how best to conserve them, perhaps by employing something we can learn from them. And so we're not going to solve all the problems in a 30-minute podcast, but hopefully I'll raise a couple of things to think about. So why do we love elephants so much? Well, they're physically impressive. They're kind of curiously put together, and they're kind of cute. Am I right, Jessica?
Absolutely. The big ears, the long trunk, like how much fun is it to just imagine cuddling an elephant?
Yeah. And they're social creatures with lots of interesting interactions that we can observe. They're intelligent. They have a well-developed temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is responsible for communication, memories, and emotions. And they are most likely capable of feeling emotions, including compassion and sorrow. And put all this together, and they are a lot like us. And I think that's why we love them so much. I mean, an animal species that's capable of feeling sorrow and empathy, yeah, we like that animal. So a bit more about the social lives of elephants.
Well, it's interesting, Ken. I'm just for a sec. I mean, we only hear about the really positive stuff, right? Like that elephants have this great memory, and elephants are compassionate, and they take care of their young, and they're matriarchal, and they care about their tribe and clear the way for new growth and all this good stuff, and then all the hard stuff that's happened to them about the poaching and the ivory. I mean, that is the only set of messages that most of us hear, is that's the one directional messaging. So it's going to be interesting, no story is complete with only the positive side.
They're just like us. They're apex species, I would say. They're capable of very kindness and also destruction. They're just like us. So a bit about their social lives. They basically live in breeding herds composed of females and their calves, and they're mostly related, not always. There could be 2, 3, 4 generations of individuals in a breeding herd. And the males live either alone or in groups, and when they're breeding, they will accompany these breeding herds. Now, these breeding herds, when they get big, like 20 to 30, they tend to break up. So what happens is in a given area, you may have 3 or 4 reasonably related different groups. And, in the dry season, when they come together at a water hole, they're friendly to each other. If they have an unknown group, they're not so friendly.
Which means they totally recognize each other. I mean, there's a very deep connection.
So
however that happens.
Yeah, there's so-called cohesion, not just within the group, but amongst these related herds. And if you think about it, evolutionarily speaking, altruistic behavior is obviously key to cohesion. And it's found in all herd societies, including ours. And you can see examples of altruistic behavior in elephants, and these are wonderful. Like, if a calf is having a hard time walking uphill, the mother or an aunt will put the trunk on his or her bum and nudge it uphill. There have been instances where aunts will help nurse or nephew or niece, if the mother's busy or whatever. And there have been instances where individuals will help individuals who are so old that they're unable to feed, to help feed them. And then there's the story of elephants guarding either dead or injured elephants or other species or even human beings. I think it's just a guardian nature that they have. So they'll stand by an injured or dead animal, elephant, animal, human, whatever, and they just stand there and guard against predators such as lions.
Why do you think that is?
again, I think it's just instinctive. Um,
They're weak. They're protecting the
Yeah.
weakness. Yeah.
Simply because newborn calves, until they reach about a year, they actually basically live underneath the mother.
Yeah.
So maybe that kind of translates.
I'm going to take you on an offshoot for just a minute, and then you can go back to, because I really want to hear the rest of what you had planned to talk about. But the construct of altruism is one that I find really interesting, because, there's this question of, is there such a thing as purely altruistic when we look at human behavior around charity and giving and kindness and all that? And is there always a quid pro quo in some way, and the benefit we get as humans for that behavior? We feel good about ourselves when there's no return of some benefit. And I think that says a lot about the interaction that's gone on around saving the elephants and protecting the elephants. Like, you've got these very much outsiders in other countries who have been told this is good, and just keep supporting this one message of, it's pure altruism, protect the elephants. But it's never that simple.
Not simple. To go back to your first question, if you wanted to be just cold-hearted about it, I think altruism is evolutionary. It's big in the social, society. But yeah, for the second part we talked about, we need to think a little logically about how to achieve certain things using altruism.
Yeah. And altruism seems like it's pure giving, but you get back that sense of belonging and community and all that thing that we innately all need. And clearly elephants do as well. They're a herd mentality, just like we are. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So there was that notion finally about sorrow and, do they mourn? And, many times if there's a dead elephant, the herd will approach it very gingerly, and then they begin touching the dead body, trunk, caressing it with their trunk and all that stuff. And even a long deceased elephant, they approach the same way, and they'll touch the skull, bones. There's a sense that they know that that thing was once one of them. So, we don't know for sure, of course, but given their fantastic intelligence, the answer is most likely yes, that they do feel sorrow. Maybe they mourn. They certainly have compassion. They show altruism.
Yeah, and we've seen that in other higher intelligence animals that we've studied. And I would put out there that, a decade or two from now, we're going to recognize that that is an incredibly common trait in many more species than we're giving credit to right now. But there are certain ones we've already, done the research on, and not just primates at all,
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when we see that, see those attributes in a primate, we go, okay, that's a given. We are very surprised and very happy to learn that non-primates kind of show these emotions as well. So I'm going to digress a little bit, talk about elephant hedonism. Just as we like some hedonism, they do as well. So just as I will travel 30 minutes for good pizza, they will travel miles to get great fruit or a bite of corn or maize. And this is, even when they're live in a national park that's got plenty of food and water, if there's a certain fruiting tree in a village, an hour away, they'll go in at night. And so this is where the human elephant conflicts normally occur. And
to follow up on that, I have a question for you. I've read and seen, and tell me if I've got this right or not, that there's a belief that elephants are aware of a balanced diet and the nutrients and all the things they need to be as healthy as possible, and that tree an hour away or whatever distance away is something that they know they need, not just that they like. Or did I kind of exaggerate what I read?
I think that's only conjecture, but here's what we know happens. So during the rainy season, elephants tend to want to eat grass. There's bulk. There's a lot of protein during the wet season. It's during the dry season when the protein value in the grass diminishes, and so they seek leaves, more. I mean, they're always eating everything, but and fruit. And weirdly, most fruiting trees fruit out during the dry season. So, and I don't
know that
fruit, but they're fruits that are actually seed pods. Same thing, but not succulent. And those tend to sort of flourish during the dry season as well, depending on the species. But so there's more of that stuff available during the dry season, just when elephants need more nutrition.
Right. Wow.
Or more nutrients, better nutrients. So then there's this hedonism story from central Kenya. It happened about 10, 15 years ago. There was a person watching this young bull elephant, I believe, come down this hill to a water hole to drink. And it had rained a little bit, so it was a little slippery.
Yes, I've seen the videos.
Lost his balance, ended up on his bum, and slid all the way down. And after he got up, he kind of shook it off and, got himself composed again, took a drink, went up the hill. Well, lo and behold, a couple minutes later, he comes sliding down on his bum, takes a drink, goes up, does it again. This elephant had discovered the joys of mudsledding.
Yep. By the way, I've seen the video. We have it, and we're going to be posting it on the show notes because it is so adorable. So I'm happy that you brought this story up.
So they're just like us. The other way they're just like us is their ability to transform and even destroy their environment. Okay, so first let's agree that, let's talk about Africa only. That's what I know. They're vital to the African savanna and the rainforest. So when they browse, browsing is when you eat leaves, fruit, seed pods, flowers. Grazing is when you eat grass. So when they browse, they're helping pollinate. And when they eat seed pods, the germination rate.
Wait, can you just go a couple more sentences about how they pollinate after browsing?
Well, because they're brushing against trees and bushes all the time. So accidentally pollinating, not actively so, but they do. Giraffes do the same thing. Germination, if you just threw seed pods on the ground, the germination rate is about 10, 12%. Once it goes through an elephant's digestive system, it's 75%. It's the fertilization and all that stuff. So there's that. When they browse in bushland, they open up the bush, helps certain other herbivores. When they graze, they tend to graze the top layer of grass, and the removal of that opens up the succulent green grass underneath, and that helps certain herbivores. During the dry season, they may wallow in water holes that makes the water holes deeper, so you catch more water the next season. Also, in the dry season, on the riverbeds, dry riverbeds, sometimes they excavate for water because the water is right underneath, and that provides new access to water to other animals. In the rainforests, they create paths just by walking around, and many, many animals depend on them. So there are areas now, wild areas that are in Africa that are devoid of elephants because of agri-poaching and habitat destruction. And those areas will suffer ecologically. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few decades.
Yeah, just to plug future episodes, we've got an episode around giant tortoises in the Seychelles that have shown the same story, that when they were obliterated by ship goers or whatever the right term is, and wiped out, the overgrowth just destroyed the environment there. And the advantages to these large animals that can clear paths and pollinate and germinate and help other species changes everything. I mean, there's no balance without it. And the alligators who dig holes to access water that helps others, like these larger animals are incredibly important, as are small animals, but incredibly important for the health. But there's a balance, and that's where you're going, right?
Yeah. But in big concentrations, it can be destructive to vegetation and other species. So in confined areas, and when I say confined areas in the context of elephants, these are parks and reserves that are the size of New Jersey. If a bull elephant wants to go from here to there for whatever reason, you're not going to contain that bull elephant. Okay.
And the bull elephants travel either by themselves or in small groups with a few friends, a few bachelors, right?
Usually when a bull elephant travels, he's alone. Usually. So a bull elephant requires about 400 pounds of food a day. And I'll give you an example of how they feed. So there's a tree called knobthorn. It's the scientific name is Acacia nigris, and you find it in southern Africa, like South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana. You'll see one in a couple of months. Elephants are perfectly. They can just eat the leaves. Great, okay. But during the dry season, knobthorn gets these mistletoe on top, like this big. Elephants will come knock down 50, 100-year-old tree, take a morsel, knock the next one down. In fact, one of the sounds of the dry season in northern Botswana, elephants knocking down these old knobthorn trees.
Wow. And has that been the history of the elephant and these acacia and knobthorn trees, that it's always been like that? Or is this loss of these older trees come from the last couple of 100 years of changed environment where they're more desperate for that food?
Hard to say, but a long time ago, a few hundred years ago, sub-Saharan Africa was just a series of interconnected ecosystems. Elephants could destroy one place, move on.
Right.
And apparently,
which is like really important, like to think about what we humans do, right? Like we do the same, as you said from the beginning. Like we have a lot in common with elephants. Like we'll go in, take what we want, and move on and take it from, leave it to just sort of lay fallow. And Africa regrew; those ecosystems regrew naturally, but it doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's some historical accounts of perfectly suitable habitat where the explorers found like no elephants. Doesn't make any sense. My sense is that they were just vacant there for a period of time because Africa was just so expansive. So it doesn't even have to be feeding behavior. The males, especially, they show agonistic behavior against trees. Just knock it down. Look how strong I am.
Yeah.
They also tend to monopolize water sources sometimes that the other animals don't dare drink when the elephants are around. In the tannins and the leaf, plants produce tannins when they're browsed on because that makes it sort of not
bitter and not appealing anymore.
Where there are a concentration of elephants, the tannin levels skyrocket.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of that anecdote and like learning about nature, this I just think is the most amazing thing, and I will be, doing a podcast on it and writing about it in my newsletters. But like plants are super smart too, right? Like there's like this, whether it's instinct and genetic or there's some intelligence. I think someday we'll figure it out. But when this is not an uncommon thing where plants talk to each other and they say, danger, we're being attacked. Everybody kick up their bitterness and make it unappealing. And then like groups of elephants or groups of animals move on. I just think that's crazy interesting. And I don't know how many people really understand that goes on, that this balance of nature is not just animal species. Like plants are all part of this amazing system.
100%.
Huh.
So they're like us. No natural enemies. I mean, I guess they're the only natural
Us.
enemies.
Yeah. And only when we have a gun, basically, because
Yeah. And so in the last 200 to 300 years of the contraction of range, basically the 80 to 90% reduction of elephant population is really directly correlated with the range contraction.
Mhm.
Yeah. And there's still wild area. There are wild areas that are devoid of elephants, but then there are wild areas that's got their pack full of elephants. It kind of evens out.
well, it does and it doesn't, because we've talked about this before, and I'd love to, for you to share it. And I'd love to hear more that, having a lot of elephants in one place and no elephants in another place might have the numbers right, but it is not the right recipe for any sort of healthy future for anyone, right?
Right. Exactly. Again, same thing with us a few hundred years ago. We could move up. We didn't impact the environment that much. Now,
Right.
8 billion of us.
Right.
Everything we do impacts the natural world. So the question is really the only relevant question is how do we conserve this apex species? And I would say it's hugely complicated. I've said that elephant conservation is proof that either God or Mother Nature has a bad sense of humor. And
Did not expect you to say that. That's funny. Okay, go ahead.
the biggest conundrum here is that it's the one species that separates us from them. So Westerners love elephants, right? I mean, who doesn't? You show me a Western who doesn't love elephants, I'll show you somebody who needs help.
Favorite kids book, Elmer the Elephant.
There you go. I mean, we can go on safari, spend lots of money, stay in luxurious places, eating gourmet foods, fly back on business class, and back to our suburbs where, your exterminator is going to come and spray for insects and get rid of rodents. Well, for the proverbial African villager, he or she must endure them. You can get killed.
Mm-hmm.
You can get crop raided.
Mm-hmm.
This is disaster, folks. In one night, a herd of elephant can move in and take all your maize for the year, and you're done. You are absolutely finished. So this is just my guess, but so I'm not talking about folks in Nairobi and Johannesburg. I'm talking about the villagers who live, basically amongst them. I would say easily 60 to 90% of them would say they hate them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And by the way, just to give kudos to Ken, he has come to this understanding with an enormous amount of time and energy and patience and pain in some ways, getting really deeply remote with the villagers and with the animals and with wildlife, where our comfy safaris don't go, to really understand the dynamic that's going on.
Yeah. So the killings you hear, the ivory poaching crisis has subsided, thank goodness. So the killings you hear now are mostly from human elephant conflict, killing each other. Okay. Now, I got a really great example of this. I mean, I've seen several examples, but this April I was in the Central African Republic, better known as CAR. It is 184th. It ranks 184 out of 191 countries in GDP per capita. Visited this area called Zanga Sanga. It's a combination of national park and a forest reserve. And people live right outside the park. No fence. No fences, nothing. They mostly grow cassava. It's a potato-like plant. That's their staple food. And one night, the elephant struck, took out the whole field, and the villagers would come out with pots and pans and try to scare them away, and one of them got killed. Okay. Trampled to death. So, and there's an important side note here. 99%, if not 100% of national parks or reserves were proclaimed by or proclaimed with heavy influence from either the outgoing colonial governments or Western conservation organizations. So that's a bit that's very important, and we need to be cognizant.
Just not to go too deep into it, but can you just give us a little more about why that happened? What was the story of why they created that structure and then left?
Well, it's not like they created that structure and left. I think they felt it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think the explorers and the colonial governments they were very hardy people by nature, and they really wanted to conserve, and they did what they could to demarcate. But so it was in good spirit. I think the devil's in the detail, right?
I mean, that's hugely important, actually, Ken. Like, you just gave a much more positive view than I set you up for, which I really appreciate. And Larry often reminds me, he's like, "Hey, wait, this isn't the right. This is quite the negative view you're offering here for someone who teaches positive, who's a positive psychologist."
Yeah.
So, thank you for sharing that. It was there was typically good intent, with protecting the elephants, with the colonial era that you just described. Like, we try to do the right thing. And just to plug the whole construct of platinum rule versus golden rule again, we don't know the right thing to do. So we guess and make assumptions based on the information we have, not really acknowledging that we might not have enough information to do the right thing, or
Right.
to do something that's better than what we're guessing is the right thing to do. So, stop and figure out what information you need
Right.
to know a fuller story. You're never going to have the full story, but to have more of the story.
It runs the gamut. There are parks where, people had to be removed. There are situations where they were justly compensated. There are situations where they were not.
Right.
There are a couple of situations where the villages themselves actually created reserves.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's that too. So here's the punchline. So luckily we can, I think, solve this conservation conundrum by learning from elephants' compassion. So my whole thesis, and this is not just, lots of people, we need to feel compassion for the proverbial African villager. Right? It's the only way. Conservation must benefit them. After all, they are the guardians, and this divide between the West and Africa has to be narrowed. So,
what you're really talking about is system thinking. Like, we need to not pick one bit of, again, the story, the system, but we have to look at the connections and how guardians and it all fits together, because it's never just a single point of anything. Like, this is a system that has to be understood and managed and supported.
Yep. So, for example, a share of the tourism revenues have to go to the village, not necessarily to just central government only. Education, healthcare, these basic needs need to be met. And we can't say, I want to save that elephant before your basic needs are taken care of. That's a no-no. So we want that.
But that message isn't getting out there. You're getting it out, and that's why I'm so excited to have you here. But that's not the message we hear.
Yeah. So we need the proverbial African villager to say, boy, that elephant's a real pain in the butt, but he pays for my kids' school fees.
Right.
Yeah. So
there has to be balance.
Yeah. So it's just like, how the elephants have been seen guarding different species or from. So we need to feel that kind of empathy sometimes. So I'll give you an anecdote from Namibia.
Great.
So here's a
Tell us where Namibia is first.
Namibia is in the southwestern corner of Africa, just north of South Africa on the west coast.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. It's from a paper written by the late Garth Owen Smith, who was the pioneer of the very successful community-based conservancy system that we have in Namibia today. I believe it was in the 70s, they developed a pilot program to see if a community-based system could work. And they set up a conservancy in northern Namibia where the villagers living amongst wild animals would receive payments from a tourism company that would operate there. And the conservancy members had the right to crop a small number of antelopes every year for consumption and so forth. And they had rules on, what trees to cut down when, everything communal. And I quote his paper here, quote, on every visit, old Calco, he was the village chief or something, complained bitterly about the damage elephants caused and the danger that they posed to the people living there. Eventually, tired of hearing the same story each time we met, I told him that the only solution was for them to be shot. He took a few seconds to digest what I said and then replied, and I'm going to butcher this. Namibia was a German colony. Niemand moet in van my olifante schiet nie, which means no one must shoot one of my elephants. The quote starts again. At the time, I had started to think that getting the local community support for stopping the poaching was a hopeless task. But old Calcoville's response made me believe that it was possible. The key was, whose wild animals are they?
Mm-hmm. This might not follow well, but it reminds me of I can insult my wife. You don't insult my wife. I can insult my wife.
Garth Owen Smith ended up helping set up these successful community-based conservancies, and then maybe they're the best of the breed in Africa.
Wow. What year was that? Around when?
I think that was in the 70s, and
okay.
The conservancies really gathered steam in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's recent. It's the last 50 years, given the history of, the African continent, and the relationship between nature and human is a lot longer than 50 years. Pretty incredible. Can you tell a quick story of you and the guy who's been planning our safari, who's your guide and your friend, has put us in a camp that's brand new in the Okavango Delta. And there is a story of this whole, I think, if I understand it right, a very similar type of balanced story around that. So if you wouldn't mind just for a minute, talk about that camp and then what came after those Namibian setups of the camps and where safaris, because I think that if, listeners are going to be most connected with the experience of not going to the zoo, but, their only direct connection is going to be if we actually get there and have this experience in a positive way. So some advice, some history, some all of that.
Sure. Basically, let me first say that ownership is really important. The concept of the tragedy of the commons. If you have a bunch of people in an area, you don't own anything. It's a free for all. It behooves me to kill that impala before you do. There are no rules of what happens, and so ownership concept is important in a community and rules. And in South Africa itself, there was a concept of private ownership, so private landowners, and they conserved that way. But in Botswana and Namibia in particular, there was this concept of community-based or community-owned conservancy. In the example of Botswana where you're going, the central government actually did a big zoning plan of the entire country. And they said, okay, Group A, these are going to be owned by the government. Group B, going to be owned by communities. I don't know how they divvy that up. But basically, that block, and it can be anywhere from 20,000 acres to 300,000 acres. These are huge blocks. They are encouraged to negotiate with a safari operator, come in, do ecotourism, and the community gets a certain percentage of revenues which is a great system. And the new camp that you're going to, Karangoma, is one of these areas where it's community based. So the Safari Company actually negotiated with that little village. I think just 2,000 people at that, and they get a share of the revenue.
And the cool thing is, I think it's part of my trip. We get to go to the village and meet these people who are the guardians and the community managers. And it's, my whole brand of win-win-win. Like, it's a win for me. It's a win for them. It's a win for the community. It's a win for the world to have this whole system in greater balance.
Yeah. And the other thing we're going to is in a concession area that's owned by the government. Traditionally has been. But, the Botswanan government does a good job. I think they have a mobile health clinic that comes once a month, et cetera. So that, even though the money, the concession fees are going to the government does provide the service back.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
awesome.
that kind of spread. I mean, Kenya and Tanzania are two other very popular destinations for Americans. Concept came a little later of community-based stuff, but there are lots of areas in Kenya and Tanzania.
Awesome. So I don't want to interrupt your story. I don't know. You gave us your punchline, which is great. Can you, when you're ready, talk a little about what the Nature Conservancy did in terms of being part of this? Every time I go, it's funny. I keep running into groups of young people who have been recruited. I don't know what their relationship is with the Nature Conservancy, but they're wearing shirts and hats and they're raising money. And that I found them at the down at the Battery Park in Manhattan. And I was hanging out with them in Chicago this weekend. Like, they're in urban places trying to build a sense of connection with the Nature Conservancy's work. So can you talk a little bit about how that's,
I was one of the trustees of the Nature Conservancy Africa program. I termed out. And
okay, wait, I'm just going to stop the humility for a moment. I think you were one of the founders, right?
One of the first ones.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, I don't know. Yeah. One of the OG, I guess is the term.
Yeah. And part of what's important about that is, again, with this whole, the history, you're not that old. It's not that old. Like, this is all really modern thinking about how to protect our world better, because we spent like the 60s and 70s and 80s trashing it, right? And now we're trying to figure out how to recover from some of these drastic decisions we made. And, there's a lot of forces pulling us in different directions. So thank you for your work, and go ahead, tell us more.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the community-based concept was, really spawned in Botswana and Namibia. And in Kenya and Tanzania, these were nascent ideas. And the Nature Conservancy, or TNC, really supported the sprouting of community-based conservancies in Kenya in particular. Also, in the central district of Kenya, there were historically private ownership of huge tracts of land. And these families, the new generation, they were kept for, a lot of them were kept for wildlife purposes, wildlife tourism. There was uncertainty as to what the new generation would have done with the land. So TNC Africa has been very active in converting those, raising money to take those, the ownership from private ownership to a structure where the places would be owned by Kenyan companies, I should say, conservancies, if you will, to make sure that those plots remain wild. And that now we have basically unfenced sort of a corridor from north of Mount Kenya going into what you call the northern rangelands. So, that TNC's been very instrumental in that.
Which is critical, if I understand it right, in terms of the migrations of many of the animals and the birds and all in any continent that are, right?
1,000%, yeah.
Like the connection, because everything, these, roads break things down, and animals can't move where they need to move to get what they need, whether it's mating or it's food or it's water or.
Right. And same thing in Zambia. Zambia is probably trailing all these other countries that I talked about in terms of community-based stuff. The huge park the size of Belgium called Kafue National Park. African Parks, which you may have heard of, they're going to actually manage the park itself. But TNC is going to work around these peripheral areas called game management areas, they're called in Zambia. Can help the people with livelihoods and hopefully livelihood strategies that are consistent with keeping of the wild.
Nature's balance. So just to just throw in and confirm that I'm hearing this right, that Nature Conservancy is a very on the ground local organization. So if I give money, I don't become an American owner of some aspect. It is being managed for the sake of the locals, whether, the system of wildlife and human together. So that's what we're supporting when we support the Nature Conservancy in any part of the world.
I would say it runs the gamut, but I would say because human well-being is a necessary component, as we discussed, what you just described is absolutely spot on. And then, so yeah, they're very involved with community-based stuff, but not just that. I mean, TNC Africa is involved with making sure there's clean water. So doing things, nature-based solutions upstream so that the downstream water users benefit. A prime example actually would be, go down the Delta and where you're going. All the water actually comes from a different country, and about 80 to 90% of the water actually comes from Angola. And we're finding,
there's a great podcast if anyone's that interested as I am. There's a great whole podcast, I can't remember what it's called, that describes the entire history of making sure that pathway stays healthy and clean and safe and protected.
So TNC and other organizations are working with the Angolan government to make sure that developments around the headwaters are nature-based solutions. We would hate to see factories built up there.
Yeah, and that's the reality, right? Like there's a livelihood at stake. There are people who have the options, right? They can either sell to private and build factories, and whether it's palm oil or it's cocoa or all these massive crops that come from Africa that it's very cheap. It's where things grow, and anyway, they have choices, right? Like, and to be more active in managing the options, so there are real options, so people can have a livelihood and live healthy lives, as can wildlife. But there's also, there's jobs, and there's, a place that you can live a nice life.
Yeah. And it's funny, the Zambia example I gave and the Angolan headwaters, they're in this ecosystem called Miamba woodland. And the soil is very thin, very acidic, not very good for farming at all.
Right.
And these people who are essentially marginalized, they have no ownership of anything. They practice this slash and burn technique where if you want an acre of arable land, that you're going to only get good production for 2 or 3 years by doing this, and you've got to move on. You fell 10 acres worth of trees, pile them up, burn them, and then you get 1 acre of arable land for maybe 2-3 years. And then the soil exhausts, you got to move on. This is like the most, it's so sad. It's destructive. It doesn't make any sense. You're trying to farm in the, worst possible place. And so
Well, it's like mono farming anywhere, right? Like, it's a short-term destructive solution that provides cheap something for a short time. And then the cost of recovering from this short-term destruction we do for short-term profits and short-term survival is just, we've been doing that. And now we need to recover from that. I mean, that's how all this has gone wrong. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, nature conservation in year 2024 is really about modifying human behavior.
Yeah, it's the platinum rule. Let's not assume that it's all about us and we're just into short-term whatever. That let's think about this in a bigger scale and a bigger picture and a system and be in this together, not just as a me, but a win-win-win. So, Ken, I'm gonna throw it at you for final story, final words, final advice, another punchline, whatever occurs to you that you want to offer us.
Well, I think we should think big picture, and big picture is in the context of conservation. It's never about the elephant. It's never about the rhino. There are important things, obviously species-based things, but big picture is holistic conservation. The people there, we got to make sure that the goodwill of our goodwill is there and their well-being is represented first. Big picture. Look, if things like the Angolan headwaters, if that stops, there's no conservation of the species in northern Botswana. So we're not even talking about anything at that point. So people-based and big picture holistic conservation.
Yeah, keeping in mind climate change and everything else that we can't control. So we have to recognize what we can control and what we can control short term versus long term, and think about this as you said, big picture. If we don't think big picture, we're in this for, we're going to be having this conversation in a couple of years in a much sadder way, if possible. So, thank you, Ken. This has been an unbelievable joy. I am so happy that I'm in your life, you're in my life, that I've taken on, a bit of the love and passion that you have been deeply in for the last number of decades. And thank you for sharing with all of us. Platinum rule, elephants, compassion, thinking about the bigger picture, the system, not just the small bit of altruism. But even if you start with that, it's better than nothing. So thank you.
This has been a production of BLI Studios, produced by me, Kai. Follow along with our other BLI produced shows at balancinglifesissues.com/podcast-BLI. Got an idea for the show? Email me, Kai, at balancinglifesissues.com. And don't forget to stay in touch with your host, Jessica, at jessica@winwinwinmindset.com. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah.